our featured review, we're looking at not the big, superhero movie that everyone else is talking about, but instead we went to streaming. We went to Hulu to talk about the new Hulu release, Boston Strangler. And for this, we're going to go to Todd first. Todd, why don't you tell us all about the Boston Strangler and not the Boston Strangler,
Yes,
and what
Boston
you thought?
Strangler.
Yeah.
Okay, it is directed by Matt Ruskin, and it's a story of the famous serial killer in the 1960s and how a couple reporters piece things together and uncover the case's possibilities, despite sexism and other factors holding them back. Keira Knightley is the star. She plays Loretta McLaughlin, the reporter who first brings it up, and Carrie Coon plays Jean Cole, who's a colleague who helps her in her efforts. Originally, I had this contending for a few Oscars at this next year's ceremonies, including actress and supporting actress, because I thought it sounded a lot like She Said. But now I realize that's not really a winning formula, so it's going to look stupid. The movie is a very standard procedural investigation movie. Ruskin absolutely thinks he's making Zodiac with this, which maybe he is, because that movie was an absolute flop. The studio dumped it in February. Nobody watched it and was supposed to be forgotten in time. The difference is that movie had a whole bunch of stars in it and it was an all-time director, so it got a re-litigation eventually. This one is relegated direct to streaming. It stands almost no chance to be remembered at the Emmys in a few months, and because it's just sort of like gets lost. We have a Bill Camp sighting. He's in everything. Like including Ruskin's original, or his first movie, The Sundance Winter Crown Heights, which was more pointed, similar kind of material, but it was more intelligent and less calculated in how it's all put together. But the moment you see that one certain actor, you're like, okay, obviously that's the bad guy. It's predictable casting. It kind of works because he's so freaking creepy looking. It feels like an entry into like a really basic miniseries, complete with red herrings, loose ends. It's I don't know. The bizarre connecting the dots montage too at the end is supposed to make it like a surprising revelation or something, but it's just kind of all like cold case stuff you see in like any murder case ever. The movie thinks it's smart, but it can't ever fully get over the hump. It's entertaining, but I'm just giving it 2.5 stars, and I'll forget about it tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same place. I've got it at 2 stars. It felt like it had some good stuff going on, but I don't know. I don't know what it was. It felt like there were so many things that it was leaving out. Like it would throw a detail at you and be like, okay, oh, we're not gonna revisit that. We're just gonna move on. Okay. Oh, there's a lead, and you're really excited about that lead, but oh, we're never gonna mention it again. Oh, okay, okay. And then all of a sudden it's done, and it's like, oh yeah, here's all the dots you needed to connect. It's like, wait, what?
Like I
Yeah,
said, there's a lot of red herrings for like a less than 2 hour movie.
yeah, yeah. Um, Not to mention, how bizarre is it to see Keira Knightley use an American accent? Like it was weird, really weird. Um, yeah, like you said, it's a forgettable movie. It feels just like a procedural. But I mean, and we reviewed one of those a couple months ago in Pale Blue Eye. This is not original enough to be remembered in the way Pale Blue Eye, which even wasn't that great to begin with there. That's a little bit more memorable because it did something a little different. But this is not original enough to stand out. You're right. They thought they were making Zodiac. Zach?
I think both of you guys are way off base in this one. I think this is actually a really solid movie. I was actually surprised by how gripping and frankly unpredictable it was. At first, you kind of think it is like Zodiac because it is shot that way. I'll give you that. But very quickly, the movie kind of looks at the perspective of journalism. I thought this was going to be a movie about the Boston Strangler. I'm really happy to report that it wasn't. And this character that Keira Knightley plays, Loretta McLaughlin, is an unheralded hero in the Boston Strangler search. I love that the movie kind of takes the first 30 minutes of this movie has a sort of almost like Peggy Olson Mad Men quality to it. This is a woman who's consistently undermined in this male-dominated workplace and this kind of smoke-infested, gin-infested newsroom in early 60s Boston. I think the movie captures that era really, really nicely. And I think the relationship that she has with her husband in the movie is actually played really well, too. And then you actually get to the Boston Strangler aspect of the movie. And that's where the movie, I think, takes a really interesting interesting shift. It becomes less Zodiac and in a way more like JFK. And what's interesting about the Boston Strangler as a historical episode is that it's concurrent with the Kennedy assassination. And like the Kennedy assassination, there's so much skepticism that the authorities did their job. Just like the Warren report is something that is routinely scrutinized. We know, if you know anything about the Boston Strangler, that this was basically mucked up by the police commission and by the authorities. And F. Lee Bailey, who in the movie is played, I think, really well by, I don't know the actor, I gotta look it up, but as the attorney, Luke Kirby, the attorney for DeSalvo. I think it helps a little bit to know a little bit about the Boston Strangler. That's probably why I'm a little bit more generous to this movie. But I think this movie captures the time and period really nicely. I like the perspective that comes from. I think Keira Knightley is really good in this movie. I thought she was great. It's not an overstated performance. There's no scenes where she's screaming or crying. I mean, it's a scene that it seems like a very realistic portrayal of what a female reporter would have gone through in the 1960s. Not just this sort of systemic abuse at her workplace and with her husband, but also the threatening phone calls and messages that she gets too. I think the movie actually could have taken this a step further. In a way, I kind of feel like it's my criticism of Till is that it should have been made by Spike Lee. I think this movie should have been made by Oliver Stone, because this was a seminal moment in our country when people started realizing that you can't just believe everything the authorities tell you. Very clearly, the guy that confessed to this killing, De Silva, was not the killer. Or if he was the killer, he may have killed 2 or 3 of the victims, but there are so many inconsistencies that it's impossible to believe that he is responsible for everything. And there's that really nice sequence at the end of the movie where she kind of says, well, you know what? This is actually how kind of things must have happened, and she's really the only one that seems to understand it. So in a way, I feel like this movie could have aimed higher, like JFK does, about this moment where we lose our innocence in our trust in the authorities in the criminal justice system. As it is, the movie doesn't have that ambition. I think the weakness of the movie is the direction by Matt Ruskin. I do think that the look of the movie is very predictable. It feels very straight to streaming, which is unfortunate. I think if I had seen this movie in a theater, I would be giving it 3.5 stars. As it is, it's a solid 3-star movie. And I gotta say, I did not check my phone at all during this movie. I thought it was really interesting. I think you guys are missing kind of how difficult it would have been to put this story together and to resist the temptation to just make it about the killer.
Well, Steve, but that's what I said. It's a lot like She Said, and I wasn't really a fan of that one either. It's just it doesn't go anywhere, and I feel like this one just kind of gets lost in its own story. I don't know. I mean, I'm glad you liked it. That's cool. I don't see it.
And like you said, I think it helps that you have a little background into the Boston Strangler. I knew nothing about the Boston Strangler going into this. And Todd, I think you said it best in that it kind of feels like it gets lost in its own story at times. And I feel like it's trying to do too much at certain times that it has no focus to it. And maybe it did that intentionally to show that there was no focus in the investigation. But
I mean, the investigation lasts 10 years. I mean, I almost had the exact opposite problem with this movie, is that it was almost too laser focused. It like the movie, the events of this movie take place over the course of many, many years. And it kind of felt like this movie took place over the course of a few weeks. So I wish, again, that, and maybe Todd, you said this, maybe this should have been a mini series, because and maybe like, to me, this recalled a little bit like Unbelievable, that mini series that was also about 2 female detectives that were looking into the case of a serial rapist. Like this movie, I think really could have even been elongated, because there's so much fascination with the Boston Strangler and the history behind it. But as it is, I think it's a really solid movie, and I gotta say, I was impressed by the job of the filmmakers to actually condense it into, I think, a pretty tangible and impactful story.
All right.
So you think it's kind of the movie that I thought it was when I put in my Oscar predictions. So, but
I think so, and it's sad that this movie didn't get a theatrical release. I think actually, to me, it's right at around that level of She Said, which I know you weren't a big fan of. But listen, I know you were. I think most people were. It got good reviews. I'm a sucker for journalism movies. I mean, this movie has that sort of like Spotlight-esque intensity about researching, but it also has the serial killer dynamic of like Seven or Zodiac. And I think it actually merges them really, really nicely. So I think people should check it out. I know it's not getting great reviews, but I was pleasantly surprised by it.
Well, it's easy to check out. It's on Hulu right now, and will be forever, I guess. So you can check that out at any point. just to recap, I'm giving it 2 stars. Todd is giving it 2.5 stars, and Zach is giving Boston Strangler 3 stars. I always like it when we're kind of across the board a little bit on these things. It's kind of nice that we get a full perspective on it.